Peters for holding this hearing. I certainly want to thank all of our witnesses, not only for being here today, but for the work that you do. And Mr. Goldenberg and Mr. Jones, I want to start off with following up on some of the discussion you've had with both Senator Peters and Portman on the issue of online radicalization. Mr. Goldenberg, in your testimony, you compared some of the online radicalization techniques of groups like ISIS to similar efforts used by domestic terrorists online today. So, again, just adding to what you were talking about just now, in your view, are there lessons learned from combating ISIS's online radicalization efforts that can be applied to combating domestic terrorism threats?
Yeah, I think the primary lessons learned is it's almost, and I'm sorry, I'm going to use this as a comparison because I am a former police officer. It's when they interview the neighbor next door, and the neighbor next door, after a horrific crime is committed by the other neighbor, says, "I knew nothing. I knew nothing about this." Right. And I think it's incumbent upon us to really focus on training, spending time with families and educators and even the law enforcement community to better understand how social media, how this space, as wonderful it is, I call it the tale of two cities, has become a place where we have groomers and others that are seeking to radicalize your children, if not your teens, if not other adults. The tactics used by ISIS and Al Qaeda and other groups that we'll call traditional foreign terrorist groups, these same tactics are being used right here in the United States by those that are asking for some to commit themselves to white supremacist ideology. It's the same tactics. It's the same tactics being used, the same marketing.
So what you're really saying too is educating the general public and families about the tactics that their loved ones could be subjected to online. Is that fair?
Absolutely. You know, the old cliche, if you see something, say something.
Right.
When I first heard it years ago, I come from the New York, New Jersey area. Right. Through 9/11, I rolled my eyes, Senator. And now I don't roll my eyes at that.
Right.
People, if they see something, if something's not right with a neighbor, with a friend, with a child, I'm not talking about people spying on each other. I'm talking about if there are signs and symptoms that say that someone that's close to you or someone that you love is now being potentially radicalized, and these are the signs and the symbols, you need to step up and say something, and maybe save the next life.
Thank you.
Including their own.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, you also mentioned the role of the internet and social media in contributing to the domestic terrorism threat. So in your view, what more can the U.S. government do to counter extremism and misinformation on digital platforms?
So thanks, Senator, for bringing up this issue. Two comments along these lines. One is, I should point out at the beginning, just to state the obvious, that a range of individuals and organizations involved in domestic terrorism are on multiple types of digital platforms, not just the big ones.
Right.
However, some of the large platforms like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, they're capable of reaching larger numbers of individuals. And I think one of the successful efforts, because I've worked with a range of these companies, they surged during the height of the Islamic State and Al Qaeda activity to identify on their platforms individuals that were radicalizing, both humans working for these companies as well as algorithms. Right. They've been slower in the areas we're talking about. They've been slower on white supremacists, anti-government militias, some of the anti-fascists and anarchists. They've been slower to devote the resources, the individual expertise. I think they've started to move a little bit faster, but I would say more pressure on these companies. And again, I'm not talking about free speech here. I'm talking about violence.
Right.
Taking down Facebook pages that are inciting people to violence.
Right.
And I think, in that sense, a number of European governments are ahead of the U.S. in along these lines. So I think that's one issue. And it is also worth highlighting that a range of these domestic organizations are learning. So they now know what they can get away with and what they can't. So this is a constant process of rejiggering algorithms and educating those that are analyzing digital platforms. What are the word choices they're using to instigate? But I think continual pressure on these companies is critical, and that includes holding hearings so that with senior officials from those companies, so that they're held accountable.
Thank you. I want to follow up with you on another issue now. I previously co-sponsored legislation to establish a commission that would review the information sharing process for both international and domestic terrorism. I was pleased to see that the first pillar of the Biden administration's new national strategy for countering domestic terrorism includes a goal to improve information sharing. Mr. Jones, in your view, what specific steps can the federal government take to improve sharing terrorism threat information with state and local partners, including information regarding domestic terrorism?
Well, look, I think there is an important role. The National Counterterrorism Center has increasingly, and I think this is important to recognize that we talk about domestic terrorism, including here, but there is a lot of overlap between domestic and international terrorism. So I think the National Counterterrorism needs to continue at the federal level to also focus on this interplay between domestic and international terrorism. I also think then that there's an important relationship between the National Counterterrorism Center and the JTTFs, the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, and the fusion centers that they can share information. So the FBI LEGATs oversees the legal attaches, and those that are embedded in JTTFs as well as the National Counterterrorism Center. I think there is an important need to continue to push information from the federal level down to the state and local level and ease a little bit these walls between international and domestic. I think NCTC has been far too conservative in defining terms.
Thank you very much. I am running out of time, so I'm going to submit my last two questions for the record, but I just wanted to thank Senator Portman for his partnership on the Pray Safe Act. And Mr. Fingerhut, I will be submitting two questions for the record to you about the importance of having a clearinghouse for faith-based organizations and houses of worship about best practices, as well as just trying to get your comments on ways we can continue to work with the nonprofit and faith-based community on the nonprofit security grant program so that they are better able to access these grants, and perhaps we can streamline the application process for them. So thank you all so much for your expertise and for sharing it with us this morning. And I see that the chair is back, so I'm going to hand the gavel back to him.